Jake Morrison pressed his back against the cold rock wall and tried to control his breathing. The thin air on this dead moon made every breath feel like work. His combat suit showed the temperature outside was minus 40 degrees, but inside he was sweating. Not from the cold or the thin air, but from what his scanner was telling him. 100 red dots surrounded his position. They formed a perfect circle around the rocky area where he had been hiding for the past 6 hours. The Zephyrian hunting party had finally found him. Jake had been running from these aliens for 3 days now. His mission was simple on paper but deadly in practice. Get close to the Zephyrian fleet, record their ship movements, and get that information back to Earth Command. The problem was that the aliens had been expecting him. The whole thing felt like a trap from the beginning. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had warned him before he left the ship. She said the mission felt too easy, too convenient, but the information was too important to ignore. Earth needed to know where the Zephyrian war fleet was going next. Jake looked at his tactical display again. The aliens had positioned themselves on every ridge, behind every rock formation, in every spot that offered a good view of his hiding place. They had him completely surrounded. There was no way out that he could see. His earpiece crackled with static. Then a deep, rough voice spoke in broken English. "Human warrior, you are surrounded. Your weapons cannot defeat us. Surrender now, and we will give you a quick death. Fight us, and we will make you suffer." Jake recognized the voice. It belonged to Kethvar, the Zephyrian commander who had been hunting human soldiers for the past 2 years. The alien was known for his brutal tactics and his hatred of humans. He had killed dozens of Earth soldiers in personal combat. Jake checked his weapons and ammunition. He had his standard plasma rifle with 4 energy cells. His sidearm had 2 clips of armor-piercing rounds. 3 fragmentation grenades hung from his belt. Against 100 alien warriors, it did not seem like much, but Jake had studied the Zephyrians for 2 years. He knew their tactics, their weaknesses, their patterns of thinking. The aliens were excellent fighters, but they were predictable. They followed the same battle plans that had worked for them for thousands of years. The Zephyrians stood 7 feet tall and looked like giant lizards walking on 2 legs. Their scales were thick enough to stop most fire. Their plasma rifles could burn through steel armor at 200 meters. They were stronger than humans, faster than humans, and their night vision was far better than human eyes, but they had one major weakness that Jake had learned to exploit. They were proud warriors who believed in honor and fair fighting. They would announce their attacks before they struck. They would give their enemies a chance to surrender. They fought in formation and followed their commanders without question. Jake had been trained by the best military minds on Earth. He had learned to fight dirty, to use every advantage, to ignore the rules of honor when survival was at stake. Humans had learned to fight this way because they had to. Earth was a dangerous world where only the clever survived. The alien voice spoke again, louder this time. "Human, you have 1 minute to surrender. After that, we will kill you slowly." Jake smiled grimly. The aliens thought they had him trapped, but they had made several mistakes. First, they had positioned themselves in a perfect circle, which meant they were as likely to hit each other as they were to hit him. Second, they had chosen high ground positions that made them visible against the starfield. Third, they had brought exactly the number of warriors that Jake had expected them to bring. He had been studying Zephyrian military doctrine for months. They always used the same tactics, 100 warriors for a single human target. Perfect. Encirclement, coordinated plasma volleys. It was effective against most enemies. But Jake was not most enemies. Jake activated his stealth mode and began moving toward the eastern edge of the rocky area. His boots made no sound on the hard ground. The suit's adaptive camouflage shifted to match the colors of the rocks around him. He had practiced this movement 1,000 times in the training facilities on Mars. The Zephyrians had thermal sensors, but Jake's suit was designed to mask his heat signature. They had motion detectors, but his movements were too slow and careful to trigger them. They had superior numbers, but numbers meant nothing if they could not find their target. Jake reached the eastern edge of his hiding spot and crouched behind a boulder. From here, he could see 12 alien warriors positioned on the ridge above him. They were scanning the area where he had been hiding, their plasma rifles glowing with stored energy. The aliens were confident. They had done this many times before. They had hunted human soldiers across a dozen worlds and always won through superior firepower and numbers. They expected Jake to either surrender or make a desperate last stand from his hiding place. They did not expect him to disappear. Jake's training had taught him that the best way to fight superior numbers was to make the enemy fight smaller groups. Break up their formation, create confusion. Make them fight each other instead of fighting him. The alien commander's voice echoed across the rocky landscape. Time is up, human. You chose to fight, now you will die. Jake heard the distinctive whine of 100 plasma rifles charging up for a coordinated volley. The aliens were about to turn his hiding place into molten rock. But Jake was no longer there. He was moving through the shadows, using the terrain to mask his approach. His suit's computer was calculating firing angles, escape routes, and target priorities. The battle would begin in 30 seconds, and Jake intended to win it. The Zephyrians had superior weapons, superior numbers, and superior physical abilities. But they had never faced an enemy who turned their own tactics against them. They had never fought a human who understood that survival was more important than honor. Jake checked his chronometer. 20 seconds until the aliens fired their coordinated volley. 20 seconds until he turned their perfect ambush into his perfect opportunity. He thought about the training sessions on Mars, where instructors had taught him to fight against impossible odds. He thought about Captain Rodriguez's warning that this mission felt like a trap. He thought about the 1,000 human soldiers who had died fighting these same aliens, but mostly he thought about the fact that he was about to prove something important. He was about to show the galaxy that humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were the most dangerous predators in the known universe, and they were just getting started. The plasma rifles finished charging. The night sky lit up with alien weapon fire. The rocks where Jake had been hiding turned into superheated gas, but Jake Morrison was already moving, already fighting, already proving that one human warrior could face impossible odds and emerge victorious. The real battle was about to begin. Jake Morrison had spent 2 years learning everything he could about the Zephyrian military. He knew their weapons, their tactics, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their psychology. The aliens were excellent warriors, but they were predictable. In ways that humans were not. The Zephyrians came from a world called Zephyr Prime, where the climate never changed and the seasons followed the same pattern for millions of years. Their entire civilization was built on order, tradition, and following. The same successful methods that had worked for thousands of generations. This made them powerful, but it also made them rigid. Jake had studied their battles against the Arcturus colonies. The aliens always used the same approach. They would surround their target, announce their presence, and then destroy everything. With coordinated plasma fire, it worked because most species in the galaxy fought the same way. They formed battle lines, fired volleys, and the side with more soldiers usually won, but humans were different. Humans came from Earth, a world where the climate changed constantly, where ice ages came and went, where survival meant adapting to new conditions every few thousand years. Humans had learned to be flexible, creative, and unpredictable. They had learned to fight dirty when necessary. Dr. Amy Carter at the Titan Research Station had spent 5 years studying Zephyrian biology and behavior. She had taught Jake that the aliens saw warfare as a form of art. They valued honor, courage, and following the ancient traditions of their warrior ancestors. They would rather die than fight in a way that their culture considered dishonorable. This cultural programming was their greatest weakness. The Zephyrians could not understand an enemy who would use tricks, deception, and psychological warfare. They expected their opponents to fight with honor, to announce their attacks, to give fair warning before striking. Jake had also learned about their physical capabilities. The aliens were stronger than humans, with thick scales that could stop most bullets. Their plasma rifles could burn through steel at long range. Their night vision was superior to human eyes. They could run faster and fight longer than unaugmented humans, but their hearing was limited to lower frequencies. They could not hear the high-pitched sounds that human equipment made. Their thermal vision was excellent, but it could be fooled by the right technology. Most importantly, their plasma rifles needed 3 seconds to charge between shots, and they glowed bright blue when powering up. Jake had memorized the combat reports from Major Kevin Hayes, who had fought the Zephyrians on 6 different worlds. The aliens always followed the same pattern. They would position themselves in a perfect circle around their target. They would call for surrender. Then they would fire a coordinated volley that would destroy everything in the target area. The strategy worked because most enemies either ran away or tried to fight back from a fixed position. The Zephyrians had never faced an enemy who would use their own tactics against them. They had never fought someone who understood that their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Jake knew that this particular hunting party was composed of young warriors eager to prove themselves. Intelligence reports indicated that they were led by Kethvar, a commander who had killed many human soldiers but had never faced a trained Earth Special Forces operative. The aliens' reputation was built on fighting colonists and merchant crews, not military specialists. The young warriors would be even more likely to follow traditional tactics. They would want to prove their honor by fighting in the way their ancestors had fought. They would not expect tricks or deception from what they saw as an inferior species. Jake had spent 6 months training at the Mars Combat Training Center under Sergeant Major Linda Brooks. The training scenarios had been designed specifically to prepare humans for fighting against superior numbers of better-equipped enemies. The key was to never fight the enemy's battle. Instead, force them to fight your battle. His combat suit had been designed by the best military engineers on Earth. The armor could absorb and redirect plasma energy, spreading the heat over a wide area instead of letting it burn through. The mobility system allowed him to move quickly and silently across any terrain. The weapon systems had been calibrated specifically for fighting Zephyrian warriors, but the most important part of his equipment was the electronic warfare package. It could jam alien communications, interfere with their targeting systems, and create false sensor readings. The Zephyrians relied heavily on their technology, and when that technology failed, they became confused and disorganized. Jake had also studied human military history. He knew about the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off a Persian army of thousands. He knew about the Battle of Agincourt, where English longbowmen defeated French knights. He knew about every battle where a smaller force had defeated a larger one. Through superior tactics and preparation, the key was always the same. Use the terrain to your advantage. Force the enemy to fight on your terms. Make their numbers work against them instead of for them. Create confusion and chaos in their ranks. Strike where they are weakest and retreat before they can respond. Jake understood something else about the Zephyrians that their previous enemies had not. The aliens were hunters, not soldiers. They were used to tracking down prey that ran away from them. They were not prepared for prey that hunted them back. The alien culture valued individual combat skills over team tactics. Each warrior was trained to be a perfect killing machine, but they were not trained to work together in small units the way human soldiers were. When their formation broke down, they would revert to individual fighting, which would make them vulnerable to coordinated attacks. Jake had also learned about Zephyrian psychology from the interrogation reports of captured aliens. They believed that humans were weak, cowardly creatures who depended on technology instead of personal strength. They thought that human soldiers would panic when faced with superior numbers and firepower. This arrogance was another weakness that Jake intended to exploit. The aliens would not expect serious resistance from what they saw as an inferior opponent. They would be overconfident, careless, and unprepared for the level of violence that a trained human warrior could bring to bear. Jake checked his equipment one final time. His plasma rifle was fully charged and ready. His sidearm was loaded with armor-piercing rounds designed to penetrate Zephyrian scales. His grenades were primed and ready to use. His combat suit was running at full efficiency, but his most important weapon was his mind. He had spent 2 years learning how to think like a Zephyrian warrior, and then learning how to think like a human fighting against Zephyrian warriors. He knew what they would do when they would do it, and how they would react when their plans went wrong. The aliens were about to learn that humans were not just another species to be hunted. They were the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, and they had been preparing for this fight for their entire evolutionary history. Jake Morrison was about to give them a lesson in human warfare that would change everything. The plasma rifles had finished charging. The coordinated volley was about to begin. Jake was ready to turn the aliens' perfect ambush into his perfect opportunity. The real battle was about to start, and Jake intended to win it. Jake Morrison crouched in the shadows and felt the familiar calm that came before battle. His heart rate slowed to 60 beats per minute. His breathing became deep and steady. His mind shifted into the focused state that his instructors had called the warrior's trance. This was what humans were built for. Not the clean, honorable combat that the Zephyrians preferred, but the brutal, chaotic warfare that had shaped human evolution for millions of years. Jake's ancestors had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars by learning to adapt. Faster than their enemies could react, the Zephyrians had evolved on a stable world where the strongest warrior won through direct confrontation. Humans had evolved on a world where the cleverer survivor won by using every advantage available. The aliens were about to learn the difference. Jake activated his suit's combat mode and felt the familiar surge of enhanced reflexes and improved coordination. The suit's computer began analyzing the battlefield, identifying targets, calculating firing solutions, and mapping escape routes. But the real weapon was Jake's mind. Trained by years of combat experience and military education, he had studied the great human military leaders throughout history. Sun Tzu had taught him that all warfare was based on deception. Napoleon had shown him how to concentrate force at the decisive point. Alexander had demonstrated the power of speed and surprise. Every human military genius had understood the same basic truth: victory went to the side that could adapt fastest to changing conditions. The Zephyrians thought they were fighting a cornered animal. They expected Jake to either surrender or make a desperate last stand from his hiding place. They had never faced an enemy who would turn their own strength against them. They had never fought someone who understood that sometimes the best defense was a perfectly planned attack. Jake's combat suit represented 2 centuries of human military technology. The armor was made from materials that could absorb and redistribute energy, turning the aliens' plasma weapons into a source of power for his own systems. The mobility package allowed him to move faster and more quietly than any unaugmented human, but the most important part of his equipment was the electronic warfare system. Human military engineers had spent decades learning how to disrupt alien technology. The Zephyrians depended on their helmet displays, their communication systems, and their targeting computers. When those systems failed, they became confused and disorganized. Jake had also been enhanced with the latest human military biotechnology. His reflexes were twice as fast as a normal human's. His muscles could operate at peak efficiency for hours without fatigue. His eyes could see clearly, in almost total darkness. His hearing could detect sounds that would be inaudible to unaugmented ears. These enhancements made him dangerous, but they were not his greatest advantage. His greatest advantage was his training. He had spent 4 years learning to fight against superior numbers and better equipment. He had studied every form of combat known to human military science. He had been trained by the best soldiers Earth had ever produced. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Weber had designed Jake's weapon loadout specifically for fighting Zephyrian warriors. The plasma rifle could punch through their armor at close range. The armor-piercing rounds in his sidearm were designed to penetrate their scales. The grenades contained special chemicals that would interfere with their respiratory systems, but Jake knew that weapons were only tools. The real weapon was the human capacity for violence when survival was at stake. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters who could track their prey for days across any terrain. They had learned to kill efficiently and without mercy when necessary. The Zephyrians were about to discover that humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were the apex predators of Earth, a world where only the most dangerous creatures survived. Every human carried the genetic memory of a million years of successful violence. Jake began moving toward his first target. He had identified the alien commander's position from the radio transmissions. Kethvar was positioned on the highest ridge where he could observe the entire battlefield. The alien thought his elevated position gave him an advantage, but he had actually made himself the most vulnerable target. The human military doctrine that Jake had learned was simple: kill the leaders first. Without coordination, the alien warriors would revert to individual fighting, which would make them easier to defeat. Cut off the head and the body would die. Jake's route to the commander took him through the eastern section of the alien perimeter. 12 Zephyrian warriors were positioned along the ridge, spaced 50 meters apart. They were scanning the area where Jake had been hiding, their plasma rifles glowing with stored energy. The aliens were confident and relaxed. They had done this many times before. They had hunted human soldiers across a dozen worlds and always won through superior firepower and numbers. They expected this fight to be no different. They did not know that Jake had spent months studying their previous battles. He knew their standard spacing, their communication protocols, their reaction times. He had practiced fighting against simulated Zephyrian warriors in training scenarios designed to be harder than real combat. Jake reached the base of the eastern ridge and began his climb. His suit's adaptive camouflage shifted to match the color of the rocks around him. His movements were slow and careful, designed to avoid triggering the aliens' motion sensors. He had practiced this approach hundreds of times in the training facilities on Mars. The first Zephyrian warrior was 20 meters above him, scanning the valley below with thermal vision. The alien was a perfect example of Zephyrian military doctrine: powerful, disciplined, and completely predictable. He stood in the same position that Zephyrian warriors had used for thousands of years. Jake drew his combat knife and continued climbing. The blade was made from materials that could cut through Zephyrian armor. The edge was designed to slide between their scales and penetrate their vital organs. It was a weapon designed specifically for killing these particular aliens, but Jake knew that the knife was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of human evolution. His ancestors had used blades to survive in a world full of predators. They had learned to kill silently, efficiently, and without hesitation. Every human warrior carried that genetic memory. The Zephyrian warrior never saw Jake coming. The alien was focused on the valley below, waiting for the coordinated plasma volley that would destroy Jake's hiding place. He did not expect an attack from behind. He did not expect his prey to become the hunter. Jake reached the ridge and positioned himself behind the alien warrior. He could see the creature's thick scales, the powerful muscles beneath its armor, the plasma rifle that could burn through steel. The Zephyrian was everything that human military intelligence had described: a perfect killing machine, but perfect. Killing machines were designed to fight other perfect killing machines. They were not designed to fight humans who refused to follow the rules of honorable combat. They were not prepared for enemies who would use stealth, deception, and psychological warfare. Jake checked his chronometer. The alien plasma volley would begin in 30 seconds. 30 seconds until 100 plasma rifles turned his former hiding place into molten rock. 30 seconds until he began proving that one human warrior could defeat impossible odds. He thought about all the human soldiers who had died fighting these aliens. He thought about the colonies that had been destroyed by Zephyrian war fleets. He thought about the Earth Command officers who were counting on him to gather intelligence that could save human lives. But mostly he thought about the fact that he was about to send a message to the entire galaxy. Humans were not victims. They were not inferior. They were the most dangerous species in the known universe, and they were ready to prove it. The plasma rifles finished charging. The coordinated volley was about to begin. Jake Morrison was ready to start the most important battle of his life. Jake Morrison struck at exactly 2,347 hours. just as the Zephyrian warriors fired their coordinated plasma volley. The night sky exploded with brilliant blue energy as 100 alien rifles turned his former hiding place into superheated gas. But Jake was no longer there. His combat knife slid between the scales of the first Zephyrian warrior with surgical precision. The alien died without making a sound, his body falling silently to the rocky ground. Jake was already moving to the next target before the first warrior hit the ground. The second alien turned at the sound of falling rocks, but Jake was faster. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to move at speeds that seemed impossible to unaugmented humans. The Zephyrian warrior saw a shadow moving in the darkness, then felt the cold touch of human steel sliding between his ribs. Jake had killed 2 aliens in less than 5 seconds. The remaining warriors on the eastern ridge were still focused on the valley below, waiting to see if their plasma volley had destroyed the human. They did not know that death was moving among them with silent efficiency. The third warrior died as he turned to reload his plasma rifle. The fourth died while trying to activate his communication system. The fifth died before he could raise his weapon. Jake moved through the alien positions like a ghost, killing silently and efficiently. By the time the aliens realized they were under attack, Jake had eliminated 6 warriors and was moving toward the 7th. The surviving Zephyrians began shouting warnings to their comrades, but their communication system was already compromised. Jake had activated his electronic warfare package, flooding their frequencies with jamming signals. The 7th warrior managed to fire his plasma rifle, but the shot went wide as Jake rolled behind a boulder. The brilliant blue energy blast lit up the night, destroying Jake's night vision advantage but also blinding the alien warriors. The Zephyrians had trained to fight in formation with coordinated fire, not in confused individual battles. Jake rose from behind the boulder and put 3 armor-piercing rounds into the 7th warrior's chest. The alien's thick scales were designed to stop most projectiles, but Jake's ammunition had been specifically designed to penetrate Zephyrian armor. The warrior fell backward, his plasma rifle spinning away into the darkness. The 8th warrior tried to retreat to a better position, but Jake was already flanking him. The alien's thermal vision showed him a human-shaped heat signature moving impossibly fast across the rocky terrain. The warrior fired twice, but both shots missed as Jake used the terrain to break line of sight. Jake came up behind the 8th warrior and put his sidearm against the alien's neck. The armor-piercing round punched through the warrior's scales and severed his spinal cord. The Zephyrian collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The 9th and 10th warriors had taken cover behind a large rock formation and were trying to coordinate their fire. They had called for backup from the other sections of the perimeter, but their communications were still being jammed. They were on their own against an enemy they could not see or predict. Jake threw a fragmentation grenade into their position. The explosion sent razor-sharp metal fragments bouncing off the rocks. The aliens' armor protected them from most of the shrapnel, but the blast created a cloud of dust and debris that interfered with their thermal vision. Jake moved through the dust cloud like a predator stalking wounded prey. His combat suits sensors could see clearly through the debris, while the aliens were effectively blind. He found the 9th warrior trying to reload his plasma rifle with shaking hands. The alien looked up and saw Jake standing over him. For a moment, the 2 warriors stared at each other across the gap between species. The Zephyrian had been trained to believe that humans were weak, inferior creatures. Now he was face to face with something that looked like a demon from his people's ancient nightmares. Jake's face was covered by his helmet's visor, but his eyes were visible through the transparent material. They were cold, calculating, and completely without mercy. The alien warrior saw his own death reflected in those human eyes. Jake put 2 rounds into the 9th warrior's chest and moved on to find the 10th. The remaining alien had abandoned his position and was trying to retreat down the ridge. He was calling for help on his radio, but only static answered him. Jake caught up with the fleeing warrior and tackled him to the ground. The alien was stronger than Jake, but humans had learned to fight with technique rather than raw strength. Jake used the alien's own momentum against him. Throwing the warrior over his shoulder and slamming him into the rocky ground, the 10th warrior tried to draw his sidearm, but Jake was faster. His combat knife found the gap between the alien's helmet and chest armor. The Zephyrian warrior died with a look of shock on his reptilian face. Jake had eliminated the entire eastern section of the alien perimeter in less than 3 minutes. 10 Zephyrian warriors lay dead around him, their advanced weapons useless against human speed and tactics. But Jake knew that the real battle was just beginning. The remaining 90 aliens had heard the sounds of combat and were trying to reposition themselves. Their coordinated formation was breaking down as individual units moved to investigate the disturbance. Some warriors were moving toward Jake's position, while others were trying to maintain their original positions. Jake activated his suit's long-range sensors and began analyzing the alien movements. The Zephyrians were reacting exactly as he had predicted. They were abandoning their disciplined formation and spreading out to hunt for him individually. This was exactly what Jake wanted. He moved to the edge of the ridge and looked down at the valley below. 30 Zephyrian warriors were advancing up the slope toward his position. They were moving in a loose formation, their plasma rifles charged and ready. They expected to find a desperate human hiding behind rocks. Instead, they found Jake Morrison waiting for them with a smile on his face. He had positioned himself at the top of a natural choke point where the aliens would have to climb, single file to reach him. Their superior numbers meant nothing in terrain that favored the defender. Jake opened fire with his plasma rifle, sending bolts of energy into the advancing aliens. His first shot took out the lead warrior, causing the others to dive for cover. But there was no cover on the steep slope. The aliens were trapped in the open with nowhere to hide. The Zephyrians tried to return fire, but their shots went wild as they struggled to maintain their footing on the unstable ground. Jake had chosen his position perfectly. He had all the advantages of high ground, cover, and superior fields of fire. Jake's second shot killed another warrior. His third shot wounded a third alien who fell screaming down the slope. The remaining warriors tried to retreat, but Jake was already moving to his next position. He had planned this battle like a chess game, always staying 3 moves ahead of his enemies. The aliens had come to this moon expecting to hunt a single human soldier. Instead, they had found themselves being hunted by something far more dangerous than they had imagined. They were learning that humans were not just another species to be conquered. Jake Morrison was teaching them that humans were the apex predators of the galaxy, and the lesson was far from over. Jake Morrison stood among the scattered bodies of the Zephyrian hunting party as the dust settled on the barren moon's surface. His chronometer showed 2,352 hours. The entire battle had lasted exactly 5 minutes and 12 seconds. 100 alien warriors lay dead around him, their advanced weapons cooling in the thin atmosphere. His combat suit showed minimal damage despite the intensity of the engagement. A few scorch marks from near misses, some scratches from flying debris, but nothing that would prevent him from completing his mission. The human advantage had proven decisive once again. Jake walked among the alien bodies, checking for survivors and collecting intelligence data. The Zephyrian warriors had been well-equipped and well-trained, but they had been fighting the wrong kind of battle. They had prepared for honorable combat against a worthy opponent. Instead, they had faced a human who understood that survival mattered more than honor. He found Kethvar's body near the command position on the western ridge. The alien commander had died trying to rally his scattered forces, calling for a coordinated counterattack that never came. His communication equipment was damaged, his tactical display was dark, and his plasma rifle was still warm from its last shot. Jake downloaded the data from the alien commander's computer systems. The information contained fleet movements, supply, routes, and battle plans that Earth Command had been trying to obtain for months. The intelligence was worth the lives of every warrior in this hunting party. And Jake had obtained it at the cost of 0 human casualties. He activated his long-range communicator and sent a brief encrypted message to Captain Helen Davis aboard the UCS Valiant. The message was simple and direct. Package secured, all hostiles neutralized, extraction in 6 hours. The communication would take 3 hours to reach the ship, but Jake knew that Captain Davis would be waiting for his signal. Jake began moving toward the extraction point, a flat area 3 kilometers away where the shuttle could land safely. He moved carefully through the alien positions, avoiding the areas where plasma fire had turned rock into glass. The battlefield looked like something from the worst human nightmares about alien invasion, except that the humans had won. As he walked, Jake thought about the implications of what had just happened. Word of this engagement would spread through the galactic community within days. The Zephyrian High Command would demand explanations for how an entire hunting party had been destroyed by a single human operative. Other alien species would begin asking questions about human military capabilities. The intelligence reports would be analyzed by military experts across a dozen worlds. They would study the tactics Jake had used, the weapons he had carried, the technology that had made his victory possible. They would realize that humans were not the primitive, weak species they had believed them to be. Jake reached the halfway point to the extraction zone and paused to rest. His enhanced physiology allowed him to fight for hours without fatigue, but he wanted to conserve his energy for the journey back to human space. He checked his equipment and confirmed that all systems were functioning normally. He thought about the training that had prepared him for this mission. The years of study at the military academies on Earth and Mars, the months of specialized instruction in alien warfare, the countless hours spent in simulation chambers, fighting against computer-generated Zephyrian warriors, but most importantly, he thought about the human instructors who had taught him that victory belonged to the adaptive. Sergeant Major Linda Brooks had shown him how to turn enemy strengths into weaknesses. Colonel Patricia Newman had taught him to think 3 moves ahead of his opponents. Admiral Christopher Bennett had explained that the key to defeating superior forces was to never fight their battle. Jake resumed his movement toward the extraction point. Behind him, the evidence of human tactical superiority would soon be discovered by Zephyrian search teams. The aliens would find their warriors killed by weapons they had never seen before, using tactics they had never encountered. The psychological impact would be enormous. The Zephyrians had built their military reputation on the idea that they were unstoppable in personal combat. They had conquered dozens of worlds by convincing their enemies that resistance was futile. Now they would have to explain how one human had destroyed an entire hunting party. Jake reached the extraction point as the first moon of Kepler 442c began to rise over the horizon. The pale light illuminated the landing zone, showing a flat area of hard-packed soil surrounded by low hills. It was a perfect spot for a shuttle to land undetected. He activated his suit's beacon and began transmitting the extraction signal. The message would reach the UCS Valiant in 3 hours, and the shuttle would launch immediately. By the time the Zephyrian search teams found the battlefield, Jake would be safely aboard the ship and heading back to Earth. Jake sat down on a boulder and began composing his after-action report. The document would become required reading at every human military academy. Future generations of soldiers would study his tactics and learn how to fight against superior numbers. The battle would become a textbook example of human adaptability in combat, but Jake knew that the real significance of the engagement went beyond military tactics. He had just proven that humans were not just another species to be conquered by alien empires. They were dangerous opponents who could fight and win against impossible odds. The news of the battle would spread through human space like wildfire. Colonists who had been living in fear of alien invasion would feel hope for the first time in years. Military planners would begin developing new strategies based on human advantages rather than alien strengths. The entire balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift. Jake thought about Dr. Susan Parker at the Xenopsychology Institute, who had predicted that first contact with hostile aliens would either destroy humanity or force it to evolve. The Zephyrian invasion had done both. It had destroyed the old human civilization that believed in peace and cooperation with alien species. But it had also created a new human civilization that understood the importance of strength. The shuttle beacon appeared on Jake's tactical display. Still 6 hours away, but approaching steadily. Captain Davis had received his message and was coming to collect him. Soon he would be back aboard the Valiant, debriefing with the intelligence officers and preparing for the next mission. Jake stood up and began walking toward the shuttle's projected landing coordinates. He wanted to be in position when the ship arrived. As he walked, he thought about the 100 alien warriors who had died in the last 5 minutes. They had been brave, skilled fighters who had died doing their duty. They deserved respect even from their enemies, but they had also been the advance guard of an invasion fleet that intended to conquer human space. Their deaths had prevented the deaths of thousands of human civilians who would have been killed in the coming war. Jake felt no guilt about what he had done. The extraction shuttle appeared as a bright dot moving across the starfield. Jake activated his identification beacon and prepared for pickup. In a few hours he would be safely aboard the UCS Valiant. In a few days he would be back on Earth, delivering intelligence that could save human civilization, but Jake Morrison knew that his real mission was already complete. He had sent a message to the galaxy that would be heard on 1,000 worlds. Humanity was not going to be conquered without a fight. They were the most dangerous predators in the known universe, and they were ready to prove it to anyone who challenged them. The age of human expansion was about to begin, and it would start with the memory of one human who had faced 100 aliens and emerged victorious in just 5 minutes of perfectly executed violence.